Well, good evening. We're delighted to have you here tonight. I'm so excited that we had a good turnout here tonight to hear from John Stonestreet. And I'm Robert McFarland, and I'm the chairman of the board of the Family Foundation. And more importantly, I'm a resident of the Valley. So even though I have not always lived here, I am a grateful person to live in this area with you, and delighted that I'm able to be called a resident of the Valley. Tonight I want to thank a lot of people here tonight. I want to thank Covenant Pres for hosting this tonight. I'm really grateful that they would be willing to host this and really put this event on and allow me to drop my water bottle. But I also want to thank Mac Nichols for setting this up and getting the ball rolling for us. I mean, Max serves on the board of the Family Foundation with me, and also Dean Welty. Dean Welty has done so much here in the Valley to really support these issues. And I am just really grateful for all that Dean has done with the Valley Family Forum over the years. I don't know how probably a lot of you have been familiar with what they do here, and there have been opportunities for us to be able to link arms in different situations, and this is one of them where Dean was able to reach out and be able to tell a lot of people about what's going on here in the Valley and how the Family Foundation was going to be here for this. So I'm just grateful, Dean, for you and all that you've done here. Thank you. I also want to just acknowledge some other board members here. There's Bill Phillips is here tonight from the Family Foundation board. There's Bill. And also Ty Fabling from the board of the Family Foundation as well. And Chris Meyer from the Family Foundation as board as well. I think, did I miss anybody from the board? I think that's all that we have here this evening. But that's a pretty good representation of, since that's about 25% of our board from around the state. So also, I want to thank you all for being here. That you would take your time on a Monday evening to come out here to hear from John Stonestreet to talk about the issues that really matter in our life and in our culture. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be here this evening. And because I got interested in these issues about 25 years ago, back in the early 90s, when I met a man named Walt Barbie. Now, some of you may not know who Walt Barbie is, but he was a man who started the Family Foundation back in the mid-1980s. And back when he had his tiny little office in Northern Virginia with one part-time assistant with him, and he was able to go crisscross all over the Commonwealth here to tell people about the concerns that he had about where Virginia was going and how we need to be getting more involved in these issues. And today, the Family Foundation has become the big 800-pound gorilla in these issues in Virginia. Now that we've got the fact that we are the oldest and largest pro-family organization here in Virginia, and now we have a very capable person heading that by the name of Victoria Cobb. And I want to just tell you a little bit about Victoria. Not only is she an extremely competent individual in leading this organization and being a great spokesperson for the issues of life and marriage and civil constitutional government and things like that, she also is someone who really believes that we should be carrying a Christian persona into the culture, not just not being somebody that is screaming at the culture, but instead being engaging. The fact that she may have some adversaries, she has no enemies, because we have only one enemy, and that enemy is the one who has been the enemy of our soul since the beginning of time. And so the fact that we are all human and that those who oppose us in any kind of a political situation really are not our enemies. They may be adversaries, but they are not our enemies. And so the fact that she carries herself in the whole arena there, it's so with such great grace and poise and represents us and the Family Foundation very well. And so I want to introduce you to Victoria Cobb.
Thank you all so much for being here. It is such a joy to be back in the Valley. We don't get out here enough, and so I am grateful to be out here with you guys. Gorgeous night. In Richmond, we've just had nonstop rain the entire spring, so anytime it's not raining right now, it's actually just great. I don't know if you guys have had what we've had, but we're thrilled to be here because we know the heart of Virginia is out here in the areas where hardworking people are raising their families and running their businesses, and it's just a joy to be with you. And we're excited to have John with us tonight. I know you're excited. That's why you're here, just to hear John speak. We discovered, I guess several months ago, that he and I would both be speaking at a Worldview camp that a church is holding in Charlottesville for some students, for college-age kids, I guess high school to college-age kids for this coming week, and I saw that he was listed as a speaker. I'm speaking to them on Wednesday. He was speaking to them earlier today, and I thought, gosh, if we could, be able to come together and maybe bring him out to the Valley and kind of do something together. But what's neat about it is, I think John has that same heart that we have for young people and for engaging biblical worldview with the next generation, being willing to talk about the hard issues. What does Scripture say on the hard issues, and how does that actually apply when we get out into the arena? At the Family Foundation, we do this in a number of ways. One of the things that we do is a Biblical Worldview Academy. So throughout our summer, every week, we're having a one-day class on Wednesdays that we're bringing in professors from Liberty University and some other places to just engage college students on these hard questions. And this actually grew out of our internship program. We've got 4 of our interns here tonight. They're in the back row back there. They're part of that Worldview program. But to us, it is critical that we aren't just battling in the space of public policy, that we aren't just looking at this from a political perspective, but that we're actually taking the time and to not just assume that the next generation sort of carries the same values and understands Scripture the way we do, but to actually be intentional about reaching into their lives and helping them understand that this is how it applies in all the different spheres. We actually worldview test kids on the way in, and then worldview test them on the way out, and see incredible improvement in their ability to take what's in the Word and actually know what that means when it comes to these heated debates that we find our culture in. So it's exciting for us. Later this week, I'll be sharing with this group 2 sessions, one on biblical engagement. So what does Scripture say about how and why we should actually engage in our culture and our political process? And then I'm also going to be doing a talk on God's design for gender, marriage, and the family. That is a tough topic with young folks these days. It is a culture that does not want to embrace what Scripture says about what it is to be male and female. And so we're going to kind of take this head on later on this week. But the reason that these 2 sessions, biblical engagement and what it is to be male and female and how we're designed to come together in marriage, that is at the heart of what we are at the Family Foundation and why we're here. I mean, the Family Foundation, our mission is to empower families by applying that biblical worldview and the founding principles to culture and public policy. All of the issues that we engage in kind of strike right to the heart of these fundamental questions that Scripture answers. And we believe, so at the Family Foundation, our call to engagement, our reason for being involved in the public square, it really starts with a very basic command, which is to love our neighbor. Unlike maybe some folks, we don't view Scripture as simply the key to eternal life, right? So it's not just a how-to guide for the afterlife, which I think can be the sort of secular idea of what Christianity is about or what's in the Bible. We actually believe that the Bible is God's instruction guide, not as a set of rules, but as the person who created each one of us, who created the institutions of marriage and government and the family, and who literally outlined right in Scripture the principles by which they all work, right? If someone creates something, they ought to know how it was designed to work. And that's how we view Scripture, is that He actually gave us the keys to human flourishing, and they're right there in Scripture. And Scripture also talks about how those of us who believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, right, we have divine revelation. So we can see these principles that are in Scripture in a way that non-believers can't, right? It literally says their eyes are blind, their hearts are hardened. That's simply saying that we have a very literal advantage when we look at Scripture. We see the way the Creator designed our relationships to work, our communications to work, the spheres in which the family is intended to operate. And out of that understanding, in our minds, it would be unloving to not participate in the public square when we see those principles, because they don't just work because we believe them. They don't just work because we happen to be Christians. They actually work for anyone. They're for human flourishing. They're as natural as the law of gravity. They work because God designed it that way. And so it is out of the call to love our neighbor that we actually believe we are called to share those principles in a loving, winsome way with those around us, right? So we can, just in the same way that we can choose not to share the gospel with someone whose eternal destiny rides on the fact that they don't know what the gospel is, in the same way we can choose not to participate in the public square. But we know the keys to flourishing. We know how their lives can be improved in the same way that our lives can be improved. And so it's out of that love for our neighbor that we feel called to be a part of the political process and to be a part of the cultural discussion of these issues. Among those principles in Scripture, it's very clear what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, and how God designed this relationship between the two. And fundamentally, I'll be talking to these kids about how we're designed with equal worth and dignity, but unique roles, and how we get to reflect the roles of the Trinity, and how marriage reflects Christ and his bride, right? These are beautiful scriptural concepts, but sometimes our younger generations haven't really been exposed to them and don't really understand, and all they hear are counter messages out in society. All they hear are that something that we believe is antithetical to actually everything that we believe, which is human dignity and honoring one another and loving one another. And so I'm excited about this opportunity to engage in Worldview. But what I'll be sharing with these students, I will tell you, is the exact opposite of what the secular left is trying to teach our children about gender and humanity and marriage. And I don't mean that in a hypothetical way. I mean that in a very specific, literal way. And I can tell you that just as an example, because we've been engaged in a battle up in Fairfax County for about a year now, watching what Fairfax County School Board is trying to do to change their curriculum in their family life education, right? So that's sort of Virginia's version of sex ed. They're trying to change the curriculum to include all sorts of new concepts about gender and relationships between men and women. It's no longer the case where it used to be the case, I think when many of us were around, it used to be the case where occasionally, elements of the secular left would sort of slip into the curriculum by accident, right? You'd kind of, oops, we have a teacher that's sort of out of the mainstream, even though family life is supposed to be about abstinence, and it's supposed to be about male and female relationships, and all of a sudden, you'd have something taught that was, well, now we don't have accidents. We have intentional, deliberate efforts by the left to teach things that you and I would never want taught to our children. Just as an example of what Fairfax County has just put into their curriculum, they've just put into it that sex is assigned at birth, that it is not a biological reality. It is assigned at birth. Now, I don't know about those of you who are parents, but when I had my 4 children, I looked at 4 ultrasounds. The first one, we look at an ultrasound, the nurse says, it's a girl. Second one, it's a boy. Third one, it's a girl. Fourth one, it's a boy. That hasn't changed since they were born. That was a fact based on an ultrasound before they ever entered the world. And yet we're going to be teaching our children that this is not a fact, that one can choose their biological sex, because it's just a matter of what one believes they are. Now, keep in mind, over in biology, I'm not sure how we're going to teach that, because there is still a biology class, and somehow they have to actually deal with the realities of fact. But that's what's happening, and it's a very specific, very direct effort to reorient the next generation. And it's not just at the local level that we're battling these concepts of undoing any remnants in our culture of the difference between male and female. One of the primary ways that the Family Foundation works is that we are engaged at the state level, at the Virginia General Assembly, working to advocate for these biblical principles in our legislature. And this year, we saw a tremendous effort to try to undo any understanding of God's design for what it is to be a male or a female in our Code of Virginia. Now, on the marriage issue, I will tell you, we walked in expecting to have battles over things like sexual orientation and gender identity, and adding these concepts to our state codes when they talk about housing or hiring, that we should be non-discriminatory, which always sounds really good, right? I mean, I don't think anybody in this room wants to be harmful or hurtful or hateful. And so these bills always sound so good. But yet the reality is that once we get into issues of sexual orientation, we come head to head with religious freedom every time. And so we expected those kind of battles. And I'll tell you, we also expected the LGBT, I think it's IIA, plus. There's now like 26 of these orientations, or 50 some, it depends where you read it. But we expected that agenda, that alphabetical soup, to sort of attempt to remove any and all references to marriage in our code. So we expected an attempt to repeal. Virginia still has a civil union ban on our books. Many of you were part of our effort in 2006 to put a marriage amendment into our Constitution. So we expected those kind of challenges, and they will continue, and they did occur. But I think what was interesting was this effort to actually not just remove any understanding of male and female as a marriage, but actually to remove any understanding of male and female at all, even in their distinct forms, right? So there's this effort in our General Assembly to actually degender the code, right? So everywhere that he or she or husband or wife are mentioned, there's an effort to remove all of that. And it really got to the point, I think one of the most interesting bills was when we actually saw a piece of legislation that attempted to remove the word woman in the context of pregnancy. Now, I don't know about you, but there aren't a whole lot of other options when we're talking about pregnancy, right? But this is the level of extremism that we are seeing in our culture and, in our ideas. But these radical ideas are the secular, godless left, but it's not just where there's nothing indistinguishable. They've made it to the point where there's nothing distinguishable about male and female coming together and creating a family, but there's also now nothing distinguishable about what it is to be male or what it is to be female. And while degendering the code sounds a little bit crazy to you and I in this room that sort of look around and say, yes, there are men, yes, there are women, and yes, it matters, some of the most dangerous laws actually sound quite reasonable on their surface. Does it really matter that Virginia shouldn't we just go along with the flow and allow bills that add the sexual orientation and non-discrimination to our code, right? This is the general consensus of the population lately. If you read the news, they're all saying this is the only loving thing to do. And, you ask the question, are we as bigoted as our opponents want to make us for opposing these laws? This month, the entire nation got to see up close an example of why all of these laws are so dangerous. Just this past month, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the ruling against Jack Phillips. Maybe you watched this in the news. It had cost him, Jack Phillips is a cake baker, it had cost him approximately 40% of his business because he had made a decision that he was not going to participate and make cakes for things that violate his religious beliefs. So in this particular case, he chose not to make a cake for a same-sex wedding. Now, he would serve a homosexual a birthday cake. He would engage in a lot of things. He also wouldn't do a whole variety of cakes. He actually doesn't do Halloween cakes because he doesn't celebrate the holiday of Halloween. But this got taken all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And on this past month, we got to see it overturned. Colorado, in this case is where Jack Phillips is from, they thought it was harmless, and in fact, probably even kind and good to pass these non-discrimination laws. The government took that law and then used it to compare Jack Phillips to the Holocaust or to slavery. That is the outcome of these laws that seem so benign and kind. These laws are routinely used as weapons wielded against people of faith who still stand on the understanding that marriage is as God designed between a male and a female. I will tell you, the reason that we don't see Jack Phillips and Baronel Stutzman and other florists and bakers and other cases here in Virginia is because we have been able to be successful in blocking every and all attempts to put these laws into place. Because where these laws go into place is where you start seeing these cases unfold where one can't exercise their religious freedom. We were thrilled today, most of you probably didn't see this because the news didn't carry it very heavily, but we were thrilled to see that the Baronel Stutzman case is another example of this. Actually got sent back from the Supreme Court to the Washington Supreme Court today, telling them you need to look at this case again in light of the fact that we vindicated Jack Phillips. So we're seeing some amazing wins. But these shouldn't be battles we're having to have, that we in America, where in Virginia, where the Statue of Religious Freedom, which is the basis of the entire Western Hemisphere's understanding of religious freedom, we wrote that here in Virginia. That is our history. We should never be seeing these battles in our country where someone's faith can't be exercised. When our founders talked about exercising their religion, they didn't say you're allowed to go into a church and worship there, but not take it out into the culture and into the public space. That is how our country was founded. And these are battles that we never, ever want to see here in Virginia. So lest we think that these efforts are going to stop this year, I'll share with you that the other side, the leading homosexual rights organization, has gone out and actually hired one of the top lobbying firms in Virginia after this session. They decided they lost one last time, and so they've decided to hire one of the top firms in Virginia to go after Republican legislators who blocked these bills. And so let me share with you, it is entirely up to us, the people of Virginia that believe in biblical principles, to share them with our legislators, to have those conversations with our legislators, because the other side is not just having the conversations, they're hiring the lobbying firms, they're launching the public relations firms. They know that with enough public pressure, even those who agree with us, if they don't hear from our side, will eventually fold. It's our job to be the voice of those who care about these things and who understand these principles as principles where human flourishing stands on the line, where religious freedom stands on the line. And I'll share with you that legislators, especially in the new environment that we're seeing, have more and more difficulty standing against the opposite side on these issues. We saw in the General Assembly this year a lack of civility that rises to new levels. Legislators and our team were jeered out of committee rooms for the votes that they took. What you're seeing, even in today's news, as you read about whether people can be served in the Red Hen over in Lexington based on whether they work for this current president. I don't know how many of you saw that article, but that's the level that we are getting to, and that is what your legislators are facing when they stand for biblical principles. And so it's our job to help them stand firm, to give them reasons, to help them understand where the voters actually believe on this. This environment has been difficult and is reaching a fervored pitch. And it is very difficult. I spoke with a legislator today from this area who simply said, oh yeah, the Red Hen thing, we've had 3 times where my wife and I have not been served. That's a state legislator. That's not somebody working for the president. This is a valley. If that is where we are, I think the call for believers to respond in a winsome but engaged way is more important than ever. And it's not just the extreme words that we're seeing. The level of extremity in the bills that we saw this year, the ideas that were put forward in the General Assembly were more extreme than we've ever seen before. This year, on the life issue, for the first time, I can't think of, in the 18 years I've been at the Family Foundation, we saw bills that would allow abortion up until the point of birth, invasive surgeries of abortion done by non-doctors, and in some cases paid for by the taxpayer. That is the level of ideas that are coming from the left that are being handed to your legislators and being asked to be approved. Now, we were able to block all of those extreme pieces of pro-abortion legislation. But I'll share with you that when they couldn't win the General Assembly, they filed a lawsuit in court. Just last week, you might have seen in the news that Virginia has been targeted with a lawsuit that would undo pretty much every pro-life gain that we've had in the last 2 decades. So undo the 24-hour waiting period, undo the opportunity for a woman to see her ultrasound before making that critical life decision in that moment of vulnerability, and undo even the fact that abortions would be done by a doctor. If you heard their quotes, they were talking in the news and it said, but this stigmatizes women. These rules, these laws stigmatize women. I don't really feel stigmatized when I get a surgery by a doctor as opposed to someone else. I actually feel protected, but yet in the context of abortion, all of a sudden things shift and words shift, and all of a sudden the left has new ideas about what should happen in Virginia. And I sit back and I think, and who's going to defend these laws that have taken 2 decades to put into place? Unfortunately, in Virginia, it is not going to be our Attorney General. He has been very clear through a variety of ways where he stands. Just recently, he made clear that not only does he not believe an unborn child is a child, but we had a case in Virginia, maybe you saw this in the news, where a woman gave birth to a stillborn child. And so the child was not alive when it was birthed. She did not do it in the context of a hospital. She then concealed the body, threw it away, had ramifications because one does not normally birth without medical personnel. So a week later or whatever, she shows up at a hospital. The doctor is very aware of the fact that she's just had a baby because these things are not very well hidden, and he can't figure out what's going on with the baby. So she gets prosecuted because they discover, in fact, there was a baby, and it is against the law, amazingly, to hide a dead body. But our Attorney General has just issued an opinion that he believes that that's not really a dead body because it wasn't really a baby. That is who's supposed to be the protection of all of these pro-life laws. So when I tell you we're in a precarious place in Virginia, we're in a precarious place. When I look around and think who's going to defend these laws, honestly, I figure it will be the Family Foundation. And hopefully the House and Senate will help hire an attorney, because without us and maybe a conservative House or Senate that might stand up an attorney, these gains that we have made over the last couple of decades will no longer stand. And here's why they're fighting so hard, because the abortion industry knows what we know. They know that in the last 5 years in Virginia, the abortion rate has dropped 32%. And that's happened because of all of these common sense laws that have been put into place and because hearts and minds are changing. But where we see saved unborn lives, they see dollars that did not make it into the industry. It's okay, though, because they went begging to our General Assembly when they lost money. And this year, in an unprecedented fashion, the General Assembly actually authorized $6 million over the next 2 years that will likely end up in the hands of the abortion industry. Let me be clear. There has never been a time that the Family Foundation needs your help more than it does right now. We were able to hold ground during this General Assembly session, but if legislators are not hearing from their voters, they have no reason to continue to hold the ground. So we're excited to be out here, and we're excited to get to know you and to help you build this relationship with your legislator. We have a lot of basic ways that we can help you. If you're not already on our email alert list, where you're just getting constant information about when the key battles are taking place so that you can engage, we encourage you to do that. If you registered tonight, we've probably got your email. We can get that started. We also are starting a new system this year that I think is incredibly effective. We started it this past session. It's called Text to Watch. And what it simply says is, we know you're busy raising your family, you're running your businesses, you don't have time to sit at the General Assembly. And as I tell people, if you've ever done it, I know Dean Welty's done it, and probably several of you out here, you sit in a 3-hour committee and you listen to bills about how the grass grows for about 2.5 hours till you're waiting for your critical pro-life abortion bill or whatever it may be. What we're doing this year, and what we started this past session and we will continue, is this idea of Text to Watch, which is if you simply let us know what your text phone number is. When the most critical debate happens, we'll send you that link so that you can immediately click the link and watch the debate. You need to know what your legislators are doing and saying so that you can hold them accountable when it gets time to make decisions at the ballot box. You need to know what they're doing so you can have that conversation. Sometimes they raise an objection in that committee that you can uniquely address with your personal story. We want to help you do that, and we want to be a connector for you in that. It can be a little bit daunting, a little bit sort of, that's not my thing, I don't do politics. We're no longer in a place where we have the luxury of I don't do politics. We as believers need to do politics, we need to do culture, we need to just have the conversations. Because if we don't, the other side they will continue. And they will continue to make gains, either through legislation, through lawsuits, through school boards. So we're glad to be out here. We're not out here as doom and gloom because we know who wins in the end, right? So we are not a doom and gloom kind of organization. We are hopeful and we are optimistic. But we're optimistic because we know the principles work, and we know that there are winsome ways to encourage people to understand that. But they do require a voice, and they require all of us to be the voice for the principles that are in Scripture. So we're thrilled to be here, and I know that this is just a starting point. I want to introduce, just so that you see him, Sean McGuire in the back here. Sean is our grassroots coordinator. If you don't know him, you need to know him. Sean's a pretty amazing guy. I was called to the life movement literally when I was in 6th grade. I knew God was saying, do something about the unborn. So it's been a long journey for me. But I'll tell you, Sean did something in college I never did in college, which is every Saturday he mobilized people to stand outside an abortion center and pray. That's his commitment to this movement, and I hope that you've thought about, what is my commitment? What can I do? And so we've got a lot of ways that you can engage. Sometimes it's just writing a letter to your editor, just a simple, maybe a couple paragraphs. We can help you with some talking points, just to make your friends and neighbors aware of some of the things they haven't thought about. So there's a lot of ways, but we want you to connect with Sean because he can help you in those key moments. So that you can really engage culture in a way that's helpful and meaningful. We have a bunch of rest of our staff here that hopefully you can meet throughout the night, but we're glad to be here, and we're really appreciative of the time that you guys have taken to come join us tonight. And I know the most exciting reason we're here is to hear John Stonestreet. I've been following his writing and what he's been saying for years, but many of you might have known him from his time when he was with Summit. I hope you guys are familiar with Summit Ministries. We love what they do, talk about focusing on worldview, focusing on young people, building a generation for biblical worldview. And now John has taken over as president of the Colson Center. And in his role at the Colson Center, hopefully you guys are aware of the Colson Fellows program. So some of you think, gosh, I would have loved to have done Summit when I was a kid. Well, guess what? There's still time, and it's with the Colson Center Fellows program. It's an amazing year-long program where you really get to study these issues and have an experience with a group of folks to really sort of flesh out some of the amazing writings on these cultures. So anyway, long story short, I won't get on he can get on the whole Colson Fellow thing, but if you think you missed your moment with Summit, you still absolutely could engage in sort of deepening your worldview. He's also, through the Colson Center, part of Breakpoint, both on radio form and in podcast form. I encourage both. I really enjoy the podcast because it's just easy because I'm driving a lot, so I can listen to the podcast. You will hear them look at issues. It's usually, he and Eric Metaxas, most of you are familiar with Eric. They do the radio portion and then the podcast with Ed Stetzer. And they hit issues from an angle that sometimes you haven't thought about. It's not what you're reading maybe in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or whatever your choice of news is. They're really diving into it from a biblical perspective. And so I find it one of the most helpful. So if you kind of think through how do I get my information, probably one of the most helpful ways to do that is to be kind of a regular subscriber on their podcast or on their radio. And I'm sure most importantly on his bio is the fact that he is husband to Sarah and father to 3 girls and a son. And I will tell you, having gotten to have dinner in his home, I guess it was a year ago or so, last summer, whenever it was, his wife is just lovely, his children. I went home and said, to my 4, his children were amazing hosts. They were helpful. They were, productive members of the dinner. I used his family as a model in my home. So anyway, we're just thrilled to have you here. Thank you for coming and sharing with us.
Wow, thank you. See, I think I'm on air. I go. Good evening. How are we doing? I'm honored to be here. Thanks for that warm welcome. I've got to say, of all the welcomes I've ever had, that one is by far the most recent. So thank you for that. It's great to be here. I'm actually, as Victoria said, I live in Colorado Springs, but I am a Virginia native. I was born in the Valley, grew up in Berryville, right up the road. In fact, my parents are here, Mom and Dad, if you want to wave. They're back there from Winchester. They still live there. All my family lives there. So I love to get back to the Commonwealth. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, I was speaking here back in Virginia, in D.C., first of all. Well, that's not Virginia. I was speaking with the Alliance Defending Freedom in D.C. and then drove to the homeschool conference that takes place in Richmond and had my daughter with me. And we had a great time. We went on a tour of the Capitol, and then we did, one of those trips to one of the great historic landmarks of the Commonwealth, King's Dominion. So that was really a lot of fun as well. But my heart's in Virginia, and Victoria wasn't understating it at all when she talks about the challenges that are going on here. We spent a lot of time paying attention to states. We spent a lot of time, obviously, being in Colorado, looking at our own state. Just a couple years ago, our state became the 6th state in America to legalize doctor-assisted suicide. It's the next frontier of the pro-life movement, is to not only defend those that are vulnerable at the beginning of life, but to defend those that are vulnerable at the end of life and those actually dealing with disability. This is a movement that's well-funded. It's a movement that's gaining a lot of momentum across America. And it's something that we need to care deeply about. We spend a lot of time looking at California. There's a lot of stuff going on in California. Right now, I think the state of California and the state of Washington are in a direct race for the abyss. We could talk about some of the issues there. And of course, we pay attention to these because what happens in one state spreads to another state, and what happens in that state spreads to another state. And that's how you get the sort of thing that we call a national movement. And we're seeing some of these in very, very real time. And that's the sort of thing that we talk about day in and day out on Breakpoint, Eric Metaxas and myself, and then during the rest of our content that we put out through the Colson Center. I hope you're familiar with that name, Colson. I know many of you are. Chuck Colson, ring a bell? Yeah, so Chuck was my boss for the last couple years of his life. It's one of the great honors of my life, being able to work with such an amazing guy. Chuck, of course, was known for his 3 lives. I like to say he had 3 lives. His first life was the one that the Washington Post chose to remember him by for the rest of his life, including when he passed away in 2012. And that, of course, was as Nixon's hatchet man. He was famous for saying that he would run over his own grandmother to get Nixon reelected. Chuck was in his 30s when he was special counsel to the President of the United States, one of the most powerful men on the planet. And what do you do when you come out of the White House at age 36, having reached the pinnacle of your career, having done everything you shot for? What do you do next? Chuck found himself in a place that a lot of people find themselves in, which is, I had everything that I shot for and it's nothing. What do I live for now? And he, after engineering Nixon's reelection campaign, was going to leave the White House during Nixon's second term. This is before Watergate heated up, and he went up to New England to get some of his former clients back. Ran into a guy named Tom Phillips, who ran a company up there. As he went in to see Tom, who was running the company, trying to get his business back, one of Tom's colleagues said, "Hey, Chuck, Tom doesn't really want to talk about business. He just wants to talk about Jesus." And the reason is Tom Phillips had become a Christian, had trusted Christ at a Billy Graham crusade just a few months earlier. And Tom shared Christ with Chuck Colson out in his driveway of Tom's home in tears, because in the home just a few hours earlier, Tom had read to Chuck out of a book called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, a passage on pride. And Chuck realized that there was more to life. Well, he followed Christ, didn't know where the next stage of his life would be. Very quickly, though, as many of you know, it was prison. He was implicated in Watergate-related charges. That's an interesting story in and of itself. But as he was about to be released from prison, one of his cellmates said, "We know, Chuck, you're a big shot, and big shots, when they leave prison, you're going to forget all about us." And Chuck said, "No, I'm going to do what I can to help you." And the guy said, "No, you won't." And Chuck said, "Yes, I will." And we're all pretty sure that the reason Chuck Colson eventually started what became known as the largest prison ministry in the world, Prison Fellowship, is because someone told him he wouldn't. And that's pretty much a Chuck Colson sort of thing to do. But Chuck's work in the prison was happening at a very interesting and critical time in American history. In fact, I remember traveling with Chuck over the last couple years of his life and hearing him say, "You know, when I was in prison, there were 200,000 incarcerated Americans. Today, there are 2.2 million. And he wondered, what happened in that 30-year period? Why was it? I remember him saying this. Why was it that the state of California could build prisons and fill prisons before I could even start a Bible study in one? And of course, there's a lot of reasons to that. There were things like mandatory sentencing laws. There were things like the war on drugs. There were all kinds of things. But Chuck realized that there was something else. Chuck was a thinker. He wanted to figure out what was happening. In fact, his first big question was, what was breaking in the culture that was creating the brokenness downstream in the prisons? By the way, it's the same question we need to ask when we look at the political process. If we see in politics what we don't like, if we see in politics a denial, as Victoria was describing, of literal reality, right? We're freedom in our world today. And this is one of the great things that Christians need to fight for. Christians need to fight for a clear and true understanding of the word freedom. You see, in our culture, freedom means freedom from consequence, freedom from restraint, freedom from accountability. In the case of the transgender movement, literally freedom from reality itself, right? Freedom from, as Os Guinness has taught us, freedom from is not freedom. Freedom from accountability and restraint and reality itself is the quickest road to slavery. And Christians need to fight not for freedom from, but for freedom for flourishing, freedom for life, freedom for what's true, freedom for what's good. And that's what's missing in a lot of our debate. But anyway, I digress. More on that to come. But Chuck was wondering what was breaking in the culture that was leading downstream to the brokenness he saw in prison. We need to ask the same question. What's breaking in the culture that's leading to this bad understanding of freedom that's now being legislated into existence? Right? Chuck often would say this, that politics is most often, not always, but almost always, downstream from culture. You get the political reality that the culture is creating. And that's really what he wanted to know was happening in the prisons. He realized something was breaking in the culture. In fact, he looked at a couple Jewish researchers from Harvard, secularists, not believers at all, who wanted to figure out this kind of growth in the prison population and what created the sort of brokenness in lives that was leading to people ending up in jail. And they looked at some of the typical leftist answers to this, lack of education, poverty, and so on, and realized that that wasn't the reason at all. And their punchline, this is really fascinating, the reason people go to prison, you want to know what it is according to their research? Ready? The reason people go to prison, they make bad moral choices. And all God's people said, duh, right, yeah, exactly, right, yeah, they make bad moral choices. And part of that was he realized that there was things breaking in the culture that was leading to a lack of moral formation, right? If you don't know how to make the right decision, you don't make the right decision. If you haven't been formed to make the right decision, you don't make the right decision. And so that led Chuck to wrestle with what he could do in the culture. But it also led him to the second thing that really shaped the last 20 years of his life. Not only looking at not just the prison, but looking upstream into the culture, but also asking this question: where was the church? Where was the church? You do understand, as people of faith, we are part of a story of individuals that God has raised up in strategic times in history to directly engage the brokenness of the moment. And Chuck was a big fan of many of those people, most notably a guy named William Wilberforce. Just a few weeks ago in D.C., we held our Wilberforce weekend. It was something that Chuck founded. It included the awarding of an award, the Wilberforce Award, somebody that embodies the spirit of a modern-day William Wilberforce. Of course, Wilberforce, that great believer, brought to faith. And there's that great movie about him, Amazing Grace, which if you've never seen it, you need to see it. But not even just for how it embodies Wilberforce, but how it embodies his pastor, John Newton. And Wilberforce went to Newton saying, I want to be a pastor. And Newton said, don't you dare, you have work to do. And what he meant was that all of us are called to serve Christ wherever God has placed us. And Wilberforce said that famously God had given him two great aims: the abolition of the slave trade and the reformation of manners. Of course, by reformation of manners, he wasn't talking about table manners, right? It wasn't like everybody has their elbow on the table and this must stop, right? That wasn't what it was about. The reformation of manners was the reformation of virtue, the reformation of character. Pre-Victorian England was an awful, awful place to be. But what was interesting is if you look back at the transition from Wilberforce and his network of partners, the Clapham Group, and the influence that they made on British society, we know that they accomplished the abolition of the slave trade. What you might not have known is by and large they accomplished the reformation of manners. Victorian England was a very different place than the pre-Victorian era and what we saw there in terms of what it was like to be a woman, what it was like to be a child, what it was like to be an immigrant, an animal, a person of faith. What it was like to be part of a family, what it was like to be a worker. Amazing changes happening. Why? Because a Christian took seriously his call to take his faith into the public square. And that, for Chuck, was something that he wanted to ask. If all of this brokenness was happening in the culture and it was leading to the filling of prisons, if all of this brokenness was happening in the culture, and of course late in his life he pioneered something called the Manhattan Declaration. It was a statement of conscience that had to do with life, marriage, and religious liberty. All issues that have huge political ramifications. But Chuck realized that the reason Christians were going to have to be clear on what they meant and what they believed about life and what they believed about marriage and what they believed about religious liberty was because the culture was breaking down in those areas, and Christians were going to have to be very clear that was going to have political ramifications. He saw that all the way back in 2009. He knew what it was going to bring, and that's what he wanted to know. How can we get the church engaged? And I got to tell you, right now, we need the church engaged. And it's at a time where a lot of people in the church feel like it's hopeless. A lot of people in the church feel like we can't. Or a lot of people feel like in the church, well, that is the job of President Trump, and we're going to let him fix the world. Now listen, whether you're for President Trump or against President Trump, I just want to give you one statement, and it's as true whoever's in the White House. Salvation does not come in Air Force One. That was one of Chuck's famous lines. It just doesn't. Salvation is something that God has given the world in Christ, delivered through the church being engaged. And you look at the great movements in history, the movements that have reformed society, and politics was a part of it, but the church was the vehicle. The church is what brought it to bear. And by the church, I don't mean what happens behind the walls. I mean the equipping that happens behind the walls that sends everyday believers out to engage the culture. To take what's true and what's good and what's beautiful and what leads to human flourishing and right understandings of things like truth and love and freedom and all these things, and takes them out into the public square. But a lot of Christians right now think it's too late. A couple years ago, actually, it was, let's see, what year is it? It's 2018, so it was 5 years ago. And in 2013, I wrote a book with a friend of mine named Sean McDowell. Sean, of course, is the son of Josh McDowell. Some of you remember Josh. Sean is a speaker and apologist in his own right. And we were talking, and we this was before the Windsor decision, which really paved the way for the Obergefell decision. The Obergefell decision, of course, was the decision that mandated same-sex marriage on every state in the nation, even those who at the state level had passed a marriage amendment, like it happened here in Virginia, defining marriages between a man and a woman. Well, in 2013, Sean and I were talking, and even before Windsor, even before Obergefell, we realized that same-sex marriage wasn't just coming, it was here. It wasn't here in the Supreme Court, it wasn't here in the law, but it was here in the culture. And so we wrote a book on same-sex marriage. And people asked me, like, why did you write that book? And I said, well, easy. I was hoping to make some friends and thought that would be the best way, is to write on same-sex marriage. It was a little awkward. But part of it was, the reason is that we just really believed, like, there was enough written on same-sex marriage might come, or same-sex marriage, oh no, or same-sex marriage, what if? And we wanted to really help the church think same-sex marriage, what now? What do we do now? How do we live when we're dealing with this? What do we do if we're invited to a same-sex ceremony? What do we do if our church is asked to host a wedding? What do we do if we have a public events center that's part of our home or our farm? What do we do if we're Jack Phillips and a couple comes in and asks for a same-sex wedding cake? What do we do? All right? These were real live questions. But I remember speaking to a pastor, and this pastor had led the charge in his state for a marriage amendment, like the one that passed here, defining marriage as between a man and a woman. It was in a state where you would have never guessed that it would have passed, and it did pass. And just after it passed by the vote of the people, which surprised really the nation, an activist judge overturned it and said it was unconstitutional. And this guy was pretty discouraged, and I get it. After he put his blood, sweat, and tear on the lines, but I'm sure a lot of other pastors didn't, an activist judge just overturned his work. And we were talking about this, and here's what he said to me. He said, John, it's over, we've lost. Now, I get his sentiment, that some of us feel that it's over, we've lost. When it comes to the culture, there's nothing we can do. When it comes to the direction the nation's going, there's nothing we can do. It's over, we've lost. But I want to address that concern. I get the sentiment of it, but I don't think it's biblical at all. See, one of the challenges that I think every generation of Christ followers really needs to wrestle with, and wrestle with deeply, is to keep straight the story and the moment. You know, we live in a cultural moment. It's a serious cultural moment. Victoria described the cultural moment just that you're dealing with here in Virginia. I could do the same thing in California or Colorado or Illinois, where I just was. They're also racing, by the way, with Washington State, Illinois, trying to go off the cliff as fast as possible. And, you know, we could go moment by moment. We could look at how this moment's different than just the moment we were in, 15 or 20 years ago. And it's pretty stunning, isn't it? Like how fast things went from being unthinkable to unquestionable, like in in a blink of an eye. But here's what, and so what happens is you stand in the moment, and the moment brings a level of pressure, a level of cultural pressure that's real, that's serious. I mean, look, none of us want to get made fun of. None of us want to be seen as a bigot, intolerant, right? We don't want to lose relationships with our kids and our grandkids because we're holding on to positions that the church took for granted as being biblical until yesterday. Nobody wants to be in that position. And so we're standing in this position of feeling this pressure. I was telling the students today at this conference that Victoria described that, listen, it's one thing to believe, that God created the world when everyone agrees with you that God created the world. It's another thing to do it on a college campus where if you say it out loud, you get made fun of. It's one thing to believe God created sex to be in the context of marriage between a man and a woman when everyone else agrees with you. It's another thing to hold on to that belief when if you do it, you're not only considered wrong and you won't be made fun of, you'll be ostracized and considered evil. And a lot of us feel like that's quickly happening, right? Like we're holding on to positions that not only make us unpopular, but in many ways make us shunned. You can't be nice enough sometimes. And the proof of that is Jack Phillips and Baronelle Stutzman. I mean, Jack Phillips, the baker in Denver, is a friend of mine. We've been up there. I've taken my family up there. His cakes are amazing. His shop is amazing. He's the nicest guy that I've met in a long time. And he was super nice to the clients who walked in the store. He offered to serve them anything. You can't be nice enough if you hold certain positions. And so we feel that sort of pressure, don't we, in this moment? We really do. We feel that sort of pressure in this moment. And it's tempting to think, well, one of two things. Number one is, maybe I'm wrong. The culture pressures us, and it tells us things like this: you're on the wrong side of history, right? If you hold on to that, you're on the wrong side of history. You're going to be swept into the dustbin of irrelevance. Even some of our fellow believers say, listen, you can't really believe that, or you need to change your mind on that, because if you don't, you'll get in the way of the gospel. Like people won't accept the gospel because you'll be offensive, right? Have you heard these things? So we're tempted to change our minds. Or we're tempted to just stay silent, to just sit it out. The pressure's too great. We just got to stay silent. In April of 2012, I was sitting behind Chuck Colson with Eric Metaxas. We were up on the stage, and Chuck gave what would be his last speech. It was the only time, I tell people, it was the only time I ever saw Chuck Colson look old. He always looked elderly and stately, but he never looked old. But he had had a brain injury earlier that year, having fallen. He had a kind of a, what do they call it? I can't, where's my doc, Greg? Hematoma, is that what it is? Hematoma in his head. He wasn't supposed to make the trip, but Johnny Erickson Tada was receiving the Wilberforce Award, and he wasn't about to miss that. Johnny was back with us this year. She's my hero. She's great, isn't she? You guys know who I'm talking about, Johnny Erickson Tada? Yeah, she's really something. She was receiving the Wilberforce Award, but Chuck wasn't able to give it to her because on Friday night, as he's giving his talk, he starts to fade, catches himself, starts to fade again, and Eric and I kind of caught him. He went to the hospital that night, and a month later he died. But it was unbelievable because even though he was really low on energy, his speech was so clear and it was so articulate. And the thing he was warning us all against was what's called the spiral of silence. Spiral of silence is a phrase that a German sociologist coined to describe what happened in Germany during the Second World War. You know, there's a lot of people that were opposed to Hitler, but not very many people spoke up about it or stood up against them because the cost was just too great. The social cost was just too great. And there was a lot of people, right? I mean, this was a lot of people that thought Hitler was crazy. A lot of people that thought what he was doing was wrong. But the thing is, when one person's silent, it's easier for the next person to be silent. And when then two people are silent, it's real easy for the next person to be silent. And if three people feel the social pressure of speaking up and they won't say anything, then the fourth one won't either. And then it just spirals down to suppress anybody standing up for what's true and right. That was what this German sociologist described as the spiral of silence. And it was interesting because Chuck was warning. He was like, this is what we're at risk of. And you know, here's what's interesting. You know what breaks the spiral of silence? One person speaking up allows the next person to speak up, allows the next person to speak. Does that make sense? It's kind of simple, but it's really true. But when you feel this sort of cultural pressure in the moment and it seems overwhelming, it's very tempting to either want to change your mind and say, maybe I missed this one, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm on the wrong side of history, or we might hold our views and just stay silent. But we need to keep straight something. We need to keep straight the difference between the moment and the story. Because the pressure we feel in the cultural moment is serious, it's real, it happens. But what the Scriptures give us is not a moment. What the Scriptures give us is the grand, sweeping story of what God has been doing in the world since He created it until this moment, and what He will do to bring history into full culmination. And here's the thing about a story and a moment. You can never understand the story from the moment. You can only understand the moment from the story. The temptation to stand in the moment and rethink the story is great, but that's destined to be wrong, right? I'm a fan of Lord of the Rings. Any Lord of the Rings fans here, right? What if you said, like, hey, that might not be enough for this illustration to work. I'm a little worried about that. Anybody seen the Lord of the Rings movies? Can we do that? Okay, most of us. All right. So, if you said, hey, have you seen the movies? And I'm like, no. I watched the first one and then I quit. You said, well, why did you quit? I was like, because they killed Gandalf. Can you believe they killed Gandalf? Why would you kill Gandalf? He was awesome. Gandalf the Grey had a sweet pipe. Like, it was awesome. Why did they kill Gandalf? And you would say to me, wait a minute. That's just one scene. Gandalf comes back. You don't know the rest of the story. And he's more awesome when he comes back. Right? In other words, it's tempting to want to rethink the whole story based on a moment. But the only way to understand our moment or any moment is from the story. Folks, that's true for us right now. That's true for our brothers and sisters in the ancient Christian communities across the planet, like in modern-day Syria and in modern-day Iraq. Ancient Christian communities that probably date back to when Jesus first sent out the 70, who now are facing extinction. They're in a moment of unbelievable pressure. But it's true for them too. The only way they can actually ground themselves and understand what's happening is by living out of the story, not the moment. I want to close with 3 things that are true about our moment. And we're going to have some questions. And I want you to ask those questions. I think Victoria and I are going to take questions. If you want to ask about specific issues, like some of the transgender issues that we've talked about, we've done a lot on this kind of the immigration chaos. The red hen story is really interesting. Hey, let's just all get in trouble tonight. Let's do that. But I want to just remind us as we look at our moment, 3 things that the story demands of us, 3 things that the story tells about our moment that are just as true now as they've ever been. The first one is something that we said to each other just a few weeks ago on a Sunday morning, like Christians have done throughout the whole course of human history, right? On an Easter Sunday morning, what do we say to each other? In fact, if you're Eastern Orthodox, and I'm not for theological reasons, but if I were, I think they got this one right. They say this to each other every single week, which is, He is risen. He is risen indeed. Now, a lot of times we say that as a matter of personal conviction, like I believe Jesus rose from the dead. I hope you believe Jesus rose from the dead. But for the earliest Christians, it wasn't a statement of personal conviction. It was a statement of public proclamation. They weren't saying, I believe Jesus rose from the dead. They were saying, no, He just rose from the dead. In fact, whether you believe it or not, Jesus is alive. And for the earliest followers of Jesus, this grounds the whole posture and the whole attitude of what faith in a challenging moment should look like. As many of you know, there's a book that Paul wrote called Philippians. It's what many people call the book of joy because Paul talks about how to have joy. Anybody know where he wrote that one? From a prison. Isn't it interesting the book of joy is written from a prison? Well, for the Apostle Peter, he spends a lot of time on the resurrection of Jesus. And he says the resurrection of Jesus grounds our hope. That's in his first epistle, 1 Peter. Anybody know who he writes that letter to? The persecuted Christians. That's exactly right. It's a group of Christians that are beginning to feel the real heat of the moment. And it hasn't even hit fever pitch. It's about to. And guess what? It's the persecution most likely under Nero. So this is about to ramp up. Peter talks to them like they're Old Testament exiles. He actually uses that same language. And in the middle of this chaos that they are facing and what he knows they're going to face through the Holy Spirit that they haven't even reached yet, here's what Peter says. That Christians, and he says this 3 or 4 times, about the same amount of time that Paul talks about joy, Peter in his first epistle talks about being people of hope. And see, the thing is he wasn't saying like, hey, as a Christian facing persecution, hope your persecution will go away. That's not hope, the hope that he's talking about. That's the way we talk about hope, right? Like a wishful thinking, like, I hope my situation changes, right? Like, I hope Virginia can not get beaten in the first round to a 16 seed. Sorry, is that too soon? Sorry. Too soon? Yeah, sorry. I hope, right? I hope that, this guy gets voted off The Voice, or, I hope that my kid makes the team, or this guy wins the election, or the Supreme Court does this or not this. That's not the way he talks about it. It's not hope for, it's hope in. And the hope in, the thing that grounds hope and makes hope not wishful thinking, but certainty, is that Christ is risen. People of faith, no matter what happens in the history of the world, Christ is risen. It's the most true thing that's ever happened. What's that? Oh, thank you. Yes, he is risen indeed. Are you Anglican or something? Yeah. This is absolutely true. He is risen. And it doesn't matter. Like ISIS continues an assault on ancient Christian communities and regains energy. Christ is risen. That's still true for them. This next election, the midterms don't go the way we want it. Christ is risen. Right? The fights in Virginia intensify. It's still true that Christ is risen. Miley Cyrus keeps singing, Christ is risen. Right? Now, Peter also does another thing where he connects that first truth, Christ is risen, with the second truth. This is from his sermon at Pentecost. If you go to Acts chapter 2, I love Acts chapter 2, and actually the first several chapters. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish existentialist, said that life has to be lived forward but can only be understood backwards. Right? And you've all had that experience, right? Where you walk into a chaotic situation and you don't know what's going on, you don't know what God's doing, but you get to the other side and it starts to make sense. We can actually watch the first followers of Jesus go through that at the end of Luke to the early chapters of Acts, right? They're walking into Holy Week. They don't even know it's Holy Week, right? They have expectations of the Messiah, that he's going to take over Rome. He doesn't do that. Their expectations are shattered. They don't know what to do. He ends up dying. I mean, it's chaos. The first time you actually get to watch the apostles kind of turn around and start making sense of what just happened is at his Pentecost sermon, right? And here's what he says. He says a lot of things, but here's the punchline. That God has made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified. See, the first truth is that Christ is risen, and that directly leads to the second truth, Christ is Lord. Christ is Lord. Here's what's stunning about that. You realize Peter is saying Christ is Lord in the same city 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks, let me do my math, maybe a little longer, within a couple months after, on that Thursday afternoon, the people of Jerusalem were saying to Pilate, we have no king but Caesar. In other words, they were effectively saying, he's not Lord, Caesar's Lord. And just a few weeks later, there's Peter saying, Caesar's not Lord, Christ is Lord. Hey, you know what? There's a lot of political forces. There's a lot of political movements. There's a lot of celebrities. There's a lot of operatives. There's a lot of people that belong to political parties that fashion themselves as Lord. All right? Our northern neighbors, Canada. It's way north from here, but you've heard of it, right? Canada, just above? Okay. Their Supreme Court just ruled something about the existence of Christian law schools, and they actually ruled that the group that accredits law schools in Canada didn't have to accredit Trinity Western because they had a lifestyle standard when it comes to sexuality and marriage that they said would discriminate against homosexual students. It wasn't it was just a statement across the board that at our school, We believe that sex is in the context of marriage. So if you're one of our law students, that's where sex has to remain. Not unusual for Christian schools to have. But the reasoning from the Supreme Court of Canada was stunning. The reasoning was, Christian schools don't need to have that rule. Christian schools don't need to operate that way. In other words, the state telling the Christian group, let me tell you what Christian really is. The Obama administration tried something very similar to that with the HHS mandate, saying that you could get a religious exemption if you met this category of what it meant to be a religious group, which almost none of us would have met. See, there's a lot of movements on the left, and this is what happens on the left, is that the state fashions itself as God. And there's a lot of citizens, especially citizens that live in a country where the fabric of society has weakened, where the chaos that Chuck was talking about upstream from the prisons has become great, where we don't learn how to make good moral decisions in our morally formative years. And so what happens is when we don't have those institutions of strong civil society that give us virtue, that give us character, that give us strength, then we can't supply our own needs. And who do we look to supply our needs? We look to the state. So the state loves playing God, and there's a lot of citizens that look up to the state to supply all their needs in the way that really only God should. And to that we say, with Christians throughout history, Christ is risen, Christ is Lord. He's Lord. Absolutely. Yeah. And see, for the early Christians, again, this wasn't a statement of personal conviction. They weren't saying that, I believe Christ is Lord. That's how we usually say, right? I believe Christ is Lord, or Jesus Christ is Lord of my life. Look, I hope you believe Christ is Lord, and I hope you've made Jesus Lord of your life. But honestly, whether you think He is or not, He's Lord of your life. Because He is Lord of all. He's Lord of life itself. Now, here's the third thing. And this is something that as a parent I don't necessarily enjoy. I don't necessarily like the truth of this. You know, there's some biblical truths you don't really like. You know what I mean? Here's the one from me. Because I have 3 daughters and a newborn son as Victoria. He's not newborn anymore, really. He's a year. But it just seems like it because it had been 8 years. See, I had 3 daughters, right? And they're 13, 11, and 8. And those 3 girls, God bless their souls, prayed for 6 years that God would give them a little brother. Yeah, and so a year ago, guess what? Yeah, we did. So they have a little boy. I think it's okay. I hear having boys is easier than having girls. So I don't know if that's true, but it seems like it, right? Because if you have a boy, you just got to worry about a boy. I've had girls. I got to worry about all the boys in the world, right? So it's just less boys to worry about. Anyway, so I forgot even where I was. Oh, the third truth. Yeah, here's the third truth, right? So Christ is risen, Christ is Lord. Here's the third truth. Christ has placed us in this cultural moment. This is hard sometimes for me to remember, but it comes from a sermon, a speech really, that Paul gave on Mars Hill. And Luke records it in Acts chapter 17. This is when Paul finds himself in Athens, and he starts preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And there's so many philosophers there, and there's so many religious people there, and religious worshipers in Athens. In fact, it says that people in Athens love to do nothing more than to sit around and talk about the latest ideas, right? That sounds really familiar, doesn't it? And so they invite Paul because they're like, Jesus, the resurrection. They don't have any context for this, and so they call him a babbler. And then they invite him to address the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. And it's fascinating because the Epicureans believed that the gods had created the world and then lost interest, that they didn't really care anymore, so you could live however you want. So Epicureanism basically became a word for hedonism, right? Living for pleasure. The Stoics believed the exact opposite, that the gods controlled everything. And so they were kind of like fatalists, right? What may be, may be. You know, we have no control over this. So he's speaking to a group of people that believe certain very specific things about the relationship of the gods with time and place. That one set of gods not interested at all. The other philosophy believes that the gods are interested and demand everything. And to this audience, he kind of weaves right through this and describes who God is. Paul doesn't begin with Jesus and the resurrection. He begins with the creation story and the creation account. And here's what he says. That the God who made everything determines the exact times that people live and the boundaries of their dwelling place. It's a stunning truth that we live in this cultural moment not by accident. That God wanted us to live in this cultural moment, not in another one. Now, this is where this gets hard because I don't particularly like the message that my daughters get about what makes them valuable. I don't like the confusion that our culture creates by spending 2 weeks celebrating the greatest exploiter of women in our lifetime, Hugh Hefner, and then 2 weeks later starting the #MeToo movement by throwing Harvey Weinstein under the bus, right? It's kind of dizzying sometimes to keep up. You know, sometimes I wish that my kids could have been raised in the good old days. I don't know when they were, but I've read about them. They seem great. But here's what we believe. Christ is risen, Christ is Lord, and Christ has called us to this time and in this place. And if we take seriously that call to this time and this place, it's not just taking seriously the call to be an American. I mean, yeah, I hope you take seriously that. But it's specifically taking seriously the call to the arena that God has placed you in. The calling to be a doctor or to be a lawyer or to be a mom, a dad, a grandparent. The calling to be a Virginian in the valley. No, seriously, these things are callings, right? They're not just accidents. That's what Paul is saying. You find yourself in the valley by God's decision. You find yourself as part of this state of Virginia by God's choice. I was born in this state by God's choice. I moved to Colorado by God's grace. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. It was a joke. I like Virginia, but Colorado's the promised land. Okay. I'm in Colorado Springs. You heard about my town, right? It's the Mecca. If you're going to be a real Christian, you got to take a pilgrimage out there. You got to go down the Wits End slide at Focus on the Family. You know, that's how you know you're a believer. Okay. No, we got to take seriously time and place. In fact, I want to tell you 2 stories that have come to light just in the last couple months to me that I think are absolutely stunning. We know the Jack Phillips case as being the most important religious freedom case of our lifetime because it really was. And I think it will be replaced now because of the way Justice Kennedy and the majority decided. But this was a biggie, and it was a biggie for a number of reasons. For no less than it was a biggie because if Jack would have lost, this would have been a biggie. But you see, Jack Phillips' story didn't start out that way. I remember picking up the paper the day after the story hit. It wasn't a national story. It was in the Colorado Springs paper. Denver baker refuses to serve gay people. I looked at the heading. I was like, oh, man, I hope he didn't do anything wrong. You know, I hope he didn't cuss them out or do anything like that. And the headline was completely wrong. Jack Phillips didn't refuse to serve gay people. The gay couple asked him to participate in a same-sex wedding and lend his artistic talents to celebrate that. One of the great ironies of this whole story is Colorado didn't have same-sex marriage. So basically, he was being asked to celebrate something that didn't exist. But this thing escalated pretty quickly. What I found out later was that there was a lawyer from Denver, who heard about that story. And the week before, she had been at a gathering of Christian lawyers hosted by the Alliance Defending Freedom. And this is a week-long training summit. I've had the privilege to go to this a couple times. Victoria's been. It's really a great event. And they end. It's like one of those things of drinking out of the fire hydrant, you know, for the week. And you're like, what do I do with all of this new stuff I've learned? And the last speaker got up and said, you know what? It's hard to know what to do, so just do the next thing. When you have an opportunity to do the next thing to support freedom, do it. So the next morning, she hears this story about this baker across town who turned down this business. She got in her car, did the next thing, which was just drive across town with her business card and said, hey, I'm an allied attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom. You might need some help. Just contact us if you do. Because she made that decision, Jack Phillips aligned with ADF. The vice president of litigation for the Alliance Defending Freedom, Kristen Wagoner, who also, by the way, went through our Colson Fellows program, was the one who argued at the Supreme Court. It's one of the highlights of my life to be out on the steps campaigning and rallying for Jack as she was making arguments inside. And she did a fantastic job. But you know what led to it? Is that a lawyer in Denver just did the next thing. A few weeks later, let me back up. A few weeks after I heard that story break, it was about a month after the story first broke and I started to follow it in Denver. There was another story in the Colorado Springs newspaper from Denver. The story was about a guy who went around to different bakers who seemed to be more progressive in how they portrayed themselves, and he asked them to bake for him anti-gay cakes with an anti-gay message on it. He didn't really want these cakes. He was just trying to see if it would cut both ways. These bakers which I would say is completely within their rights, refuse to bake an anti-gay cake. Interestingly enough, Jack Phillips refuses to bake an anti-gay. If this guy had gone to Jack Phillips and said, bake this cake that says, gays are going to hell or something, he wouldn't have done it. But he went to all these other bakeries. Well, just like the gay couple turned Jack Phillips into the Colorado Civil Rights Commission for discrimination, this guy turned these bakers in to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission for their discrimination. The Civil Rights Commission ruled against Jack. The Civil Rights Commission also said that these other bakers had a right to refuse hate speech in their anti-gay cakes. I remember reading that newspaper, and I saw that story, and I thought, I'll bet my hat that's Bill Jack. I know this guy named Bill Jack. Bill Jack's nuts. Like, he's crazy. He's like a Christian Indiana Jones, you know what I mean? Like, he just comes up with these really creative ideas. I've got him working right now on how we can take down the whole TSA, but that's a whole nother story. And so, anyway, I saw that, and guess who it was? It was Bill Jack. And I thought, well, Bill, you're crazy. You're just trying to make a point. Do you know something? Justice Kennedy wrote the majority opinion in the case of Jack Phillips, saying that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had mistreated him. There were two other concurring opinions written. One by left-leaning justices, like Elena Kagan, who was signed on by Justice Breyer. And then there was another one by Gorsuch that was signed on, no, I think he was by himself, and then Clarence Thomas. So it was actually 4 total opinions that were in support of Jack Phillips, saying that the Civil Rights Commission had mistreated him in the way that they had treated him. And 3 of those 4 cited as evidence the fact that the Civil Rights Commission did not treat the bakers that refused to bake the anti-gay cakes as cruelly and as meanly as they treated Jack Phillips. I ran into Bill Jack at the Virginia Homeschool Conference just 2 weeks ago, and I said, Bill, 3 opinions cited you. Here's what he said. He said, man, I waited for a month. And I said, somebody's got to do this. Somebody's got to do this. And I prayed about it. And I went to my wife and I said, this is what I'm thinking of. And she just went, oh no. But I tell you what, that 7-2 decision wouldn't have been a 7-2 decision in that language had that attorney in Denver not just driven across the county and given her business card to Jack Phillips, and had Bill Jack not woken up and said, somebody's got to do something. What can you do? Sometimes we wonder, what does God want me to do one day? I don't think God actually is all that interested in that most of the time, maybe sometimes. I think most of the time he's way more interested in, what should I do next? What should I do about the next opportunity? What should I do about the next injustice? What should I do about the next chance to stand up for the least of these? What should I do to stand up for freedom? When's the next time I can't be silent? Because if I'm silent, somebody else will be silent. What's the next time, the next time, the next time? Does that make sense? All right, well, it's been a pleasure to be with you tonight. Victoria, you want to come up? I think the long-term impact of abortion is way more felt on the overall economic pyramid, and what we're seeing too in terms of international things. Victoria mentioned the economic pyramid, which is, essentially that there was originally planned to be far more workers than there were to support those who were retired and needed a safety net in one way or the other. And now that just hasn't happened, and abortion is a large part of that. I think that one of the hard things about linking that issue with the immigration issue is that the immigration issue has been hijacked by rhetoric that is dehumanizing in a lot of places. And I think we can say we want to be tough on immigration without denigrating the humanity of even those who are trying to enter the country. And we've got to be able to do both as Christians. We can't talk about immigration the same way that some of the hardliners talk about it. Even if we think that there should be a wall, we think there should be tough borders. I'm one of those, and I'm one of those that think we should be that we should be really smart on immigration. And we know, because we understand worldview and what drives people who want to harm America, are really bad intentions. And to think that they're not going to come through our borders is just not wise. And at the same time, we can do things that are humane. And I think that's one of the challenges there. But I will say, though, that there are a lot of opportunities for pro-lifers to take advantage of. One of those right now that's fascinating is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm doing this off memory. We did a piece a couple months ago that across the European Union, if you talk about the major prime ministers, most of the leaders of European countries, the main ones, Germany, I'm thinking Spain, I'm thinking Britain, I'm thinking a handful of others, are without children. It's an amazing thing that most of the leaders of Western nations in Europe don't have kids. So they're embracing this kind of understanding of that children are optional. And these are the same countries where their birth rates are so terribly low. This is Iceland is one of these countries. Iceland's the nation that announced last year that they had eradicated Down syndrome, which of course means only that they killed all the babies that they were able to diagnose in the womb with Down syndrome. And this is a real issue. When you have people leading a country that aren't themselves, aren't married, or themselves don't understand that inherent connection between marriage and children, what you have is a straight line to a state that wants to play God. Because one of the things, when you believe in God, and the way God created the world, He gave certain power to the state, and He gave certain authority to the family, and He gave certain authority to the church. Abraham Kuyper called that sphere of sovereignty. But if you don't believe in God, then the state is the one that grants all the power. And that's a really frightening thing coming out of Europe. So I would agree completely that there's a lot more that we can do. I also say, too, that one of the reasons pro-lifers don't always talk a lot is because pro-lifers do a lot of doing. We get a lot of bad press. And I think it's absolutely bogus, and I call it out every time I hear it. Hear things like, in fact, I got a letter this week. This breakpoint's coming next week, because I got really grumpy. I got a letter that said, because we did something on abortion, and we do it like 3-4 times a month. And the letter was, well, we need to keep abortion safe, legal, and rare. And we responded to that saying, well, abortion is not safe. Like, somebody dies in abortion every time. It's not safe. If it's legal, why should it be rare? That doesn't make any sense, right? And by the way, no one has said safe, legal, and rare since Bill Clinton. I think the last Democratic convention, they stood up and gave, Planned Parenthood thundering applause. So no one really believes that. But the other thing she said is, you guys only care about babies when they're in the womb. That's just observably, statistically, economically, demonstrably not true. Christians care. I mean, the pregnancy care center movement, I'm biased on this. My mom ran a pregnancy care center in Winchester for more than 10 years. Yeah, clap for her. It was unbelievable. It did. Yeah, they cared for babies in the womb. I was there on Christmas mornings and Thanksgiving mornings when she took phone calls back into the back and tried to counsel a woman out of making a bad decision. I saw that happen, but I also saw them go medical. I also saw them have parenting classes. I also saw them go into the schools and help children. I also saw them reach out to the Hispanic community, right? So sometimes pro-lifers get a bad rap, and I'm a little defensive on that. So, thanks, good question.
I wanted to go back for a second to the Jack Phillips case, and I totally agree with you that if he had lost, it would have been a disaster. But the way the nature of finding in favor of him worked,
right,
that they were mean to him, it didn't really address the core issue that I think we're all worried about, which
right,
is the religious freedom aspect. So I was happy he didn't lose, but I wasn't celebrating the victory because of the way that it went. I was just curious about your thoughts on that. Both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I still use the word big victory. We did a webinar with Professor Robbie George after the case. I don't know if you sat through that, and he made a good point. He said, don't call it a big victory. And I said, I get that, because it wasn't a sweeping victory. The court did not deal with the rights, the free exercise or the freedom of speech issue. It just didn't. And that's disappointing. But I'm telling you, it's a big decision in two ways. Number one, 7 Supreme Court justices said that there was evidence of animus against this specific position. Justice Kennedy said that to hold this position is not unreasonable. That's huge, because in the Obergefell decision and the Windsor decision, he kind of said that to hold that position was to be a bigot, right? So for him to reverse course like this, it was pretty big. And, you know, when you look at what the Civil Rights Commission did to Jack, that's the other big thing. And this is why local stuff matters. The Civil Rights Commission in Colorado is a disaster of an organization. Now, here's the hard part. They're just a bunch of unelected people that are trying to do the right thing. Somehow, they had been so brainwashed by the media. I mean, we're not Massachusetts, right? We're not Washington State. We're not Colorado. I mean, my friend running for Congress out of Colorado says, you know, Colorado is like a lesbian couple smoking pot on their front porch, cleaning their guns, right? I mean, this is kind of Colorado, right? And it's just this bizarre place. The Colorado Civil Rights Commission, you talked about some of the language. This was unbelievable language, right? And if the Supreme Court had let him get away with that, open season on Christians, right? And it would have been completely okay legally to, as you're trying to, as Tim Gill, who funded the whole pro-gay movement in Colorado and across America, said that now he got same-sex marriage, his job was to, and I'm quoting him, punish the wicked. And really, Kennedy and the court said, you know, you're not going to do that. You see what I mean? But you're right. That means there's another case. We all waited what was going to happen with Barronell. Barronell is the florist, of course. And the court vacated that decision, sent it back to the Washington court to redecide that. It's going to come up. It's not going to happen in a year. There's going to be a whole lot of other cases that could potentially come up. This is game on, basically. But it's not game over. And that's the real difference. But yeah, you're right, Greg. There's no question it didn't go as far as we'd hoped.
Yeah, I had the same first reaction as sort of, you know, the movement was celebrating and I was kind of having I want to celebrate, but I wanted so much more, right? So I think that's a legitimate sort of, I was really hoping, and I liked the fact set of the Jack Phillips case. I mean, I always worry about the case that gets all the way there that doesn't have facts like Jack is actually kind to every, you know, I wanted a case that was, I mean, there was a lot to like about that case. So it was a little disappointing that it was decided on this narrow question as opposed to the broader, but there are so many cases in the works. I think the Klein case might be the next one up. That's very similar, cake baker kind of situation out of Oregon. And the Barronell-Stutzman, when that got kicked back, I hadn't looked at the details of the facts there, but there's animus in that case too. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be hard. Washington Supreme Court will desperately want to still decide against her in this particular case, but hopefully their decision has boxed them in a little bit, and they still will have all the issues on the table. So that could still go back up to the Supreme Court. I think there'll be some things that beat it to the Supreme Court, but we'll see. But yeah, I wanted something more, but I think we do, to John's point, a loss would have been catastrophic. So it is big.
Yeah.
I'll just add a comment to what you're talking about. When the Obergefell case went through, the opinion by Alito seemed to warn of the fact that this decision would affect people of faith. It isn't like you can have this right and you can go and exercise it, but everybody who doesn't agree with it has to also go along with the lifestyle and support it and everything else. But my question relates to religion in school settings. My own situation came up. It's a small example, but just like to hear some of your thoughts about what's going on and how religion or biblical teaching or biblically based instruction is a role in the public education system. I work with individual students pretty often that are public school students. I gave a young student, I asked her if she wanted a Gideon New Testament. I'm actually not a Gideon, but I happen to have one with me. She said, okay, I'll take it. And, we didn't say too much about it. And later I was kicked off the assignment because of that. So, there may be a lot of other public educators here or a lot of people with children in schools. Can you kind of address that area and to how that works and how, Christian educators, teachers, administrators, et cetera, might need to conduct themselves?
Yeah. You probably speak more to the specific Virginia situation? Or?
Yeah, so, I mean, in Virginia, we've done a lot to protect a student's right to express their faith anyway. You know, so the Supreme Court, there's been lots of great cases that we actually, at the Family Foundation, work to sort of enshrine into our code to ensure that if a child does an assignment like, you know, who's your hero, that when they write Jesus as that assignment answer, they cannot have repercussions. And we've had that happen, and that's why we kind of felt like we needed to put an exclamation point on the court cases to do that. It is a lot harder when it comes with the adults working with students in the schools. There is just simply not as much case law that backs up an ability for an adult to share their faith in the public school setting, and that's the challenge. So we fight for every angle we can get, like after-school clubs have a lot of solid ground, use of public school facilities, programs that are not tied directly to the school system. Those are the kinds of places that we can work. It's a lot more challenging to figure out how a teacher in the course of their everyday activity is able to have that faith conversation. It has to be entirely student-led, entirely student-initiated, and even the reaction sometimes, even though what else are you supposed to do if you're a faith-based person and someone's initiating a faith-based conversation, even that can be extremely challenging, but obviously worthy of the fight. Our founders didn't intend for the public schools to be naked of faith. That was not the intention of our system.
You know, there are two national groups that, a couple national groups that are working on this. It's not it doesn't answer some of the specific challenges, and really it goes kind of hostile territory versus not hostile territory. But one is a group called Gateways to Better Education. It's a group that we have featured a couple times on Breakpoint, and they train teachers that are in public education, administrators, about what they can and can't do, and particularly about using the Bible. I mean, one way to get the Bible in is that, you know, when you talk about Shakespeare, when you talk about Western Civ, when you talk about our national motto, when you talk about the number of biblical references that are in everyday common language that you would not understand if you did not have some level of biblical literacy, that there's a way to actually get that. And there's also a movement to teach Bible as history. One thing you should pray for is that Steve Green at Hobby Lobby, who of course built the Bible Museum, right, in D.C. If you haven't been, by the way, it's really, really quite good. But they're doing a curriculum project to kind of introduce the Bible into public schools as well. Yeah. And it's going through a lot of rounds of testing because, as Victoria said, it's really difficult. I will say this too: there's really a live debate because of some of these challenges about whether or not we should stay in the public square if it's time to go. And I think almost always my answer to that is let's stay. We'll know it's time to go because we'll have a foot in our rear end and we'll be being pushed out the door. At that point, you know, it's kind of like, you know, should the church stay in the marriage business? Absolutely, the church. The state's going to kick the church out of the marriage business eventually, but let's stay there and be a witness for what is true just as long as we possibly can. And I'm wondering if it's time for some of us to do some work on a theology of when it's time to be fired. I spoke to a Christian college last year, and I don't know the president expected me to say this, but I said, you know, it's an expensive Christian college in Ohio, about $40,000 a year. And I said, you know, you guys might be paying about $160,000 to learn a skill, to learn a field, to enter a career, where really the most important thing you can do to follow Jesus is to get fired. I hope that's not the case. I'm glad people like Victoria and ADF and people are fighting against that sort of stuff. But, you know, Christians have faced those sorts of choices before. And so, again, whatever happens in the culture, Christ is risen, Christ is Lord, Christ has put us here. So we might have to think through that a little bit too.
You said gateways to what?
Sorry, gateways to better education. Gateways to better education.
I will mention just on a larger front in the employment arena, there are a lot of ways that the secular left is attempting to capture the licensing credential sort of field. So whether it's counselors, whether it's lawyers, whether it's, you name it, if you get a license or are part of a professional association, that is an area they're working. We're working where we can at the state level to block those efforts, whether it's, and there's a number of fields, but that is a new frontier because there is an effort to sort of see if they can put a foot in our rear ends and send us back in.
Especially in California.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he was next, yeah.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Stonestreet, what, in your opinion, is the most important issue facing America today, and what are the little steps you talked about that we could take to fix that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that I wrote a book recently called A Practical Guide to Culture, in which we made a distinction between the cultural waves, like the issues that you feel, and the cultural undercurrents that create the waves. And I think the most important cultural undercurrent that's creating a lot of the waves that we're feeling is the struggle over the question what it means to be human. We often look at the big changes that have taken place in American culture and we see them as moral issues. Things that were wrong are now right, things that are right are now wrong. No question, there's been moral change. But the moral change is the fruit, not the root. The root of the issue is not the shift that's happened in morality, it's the shift that has happened in what we think it means to be human. The stories on this are stunning. I I could just go down the line, but almost all the accreditation issues have to do with the LGBTQ movement. We've talked about that as if, well, that's clearly morally wrong. They've talked about it like this is who I am. So we're having a moral conversation, and the conversation really has moved to identity, what it means to be human. Good news is the Christians have the single best answer on the whole marketplace of ideas about what it means to be human, about what gives us value and purpose, right? That we're not what we look like, we're not the color of our skin, we're not our ethnicity or our poverty level, that we are made in the image and likeness of God, which gives us inherent worth from the moment of conception to the moment of death. What a great answer. So one of the things we have to do is learn how to integrate the image of God into wherever God has called us, right? And if you say the greatest issue facing our country, it's whether the church is going to do these sorts of things. The problem is not the church. As one of my friends said, if we could just get all the Christians saved, we'd be in good shape. Right? And that's a little harsh, but at the same time, I think what Chuck was warning about with the spiral silence, right? Listen, culture is the cult, right? The culture is a reflection of the cult of a people, what the belief system is. And the church was placed by God to infiltrate the belief system, salt and light. So if the culture's not where it needs to be, it's probably because the church isn't where it needs to be.
I had a question. I forgot what it was. But in the meantime, I have two comments. I am a pastor, and I want to say that the problem is not the church. The problem is the pulpit. It's the pastors who lead the churches, and pastors have relinquished their role and their authority in leading the churches. So I hold my clan responsible. Second comment about the education thing. I commend Christian teachers who feel called to stay in the secular public schools. And I've heard the argument about children, being salt and light in the school, but I've got 11 grandchildren, and they're just too young to be salt and light. I am on the board of Blue Ridge Christian School, and we're open for business if anybody wants. Got one of our Blue Ridge Christian Schools teachers right here. But my question originally was about your resources. About 25 years ago, someone gave me a cassette tape. Do you all know what a cassette tape is?
I've heard of those, yeah.
I didn't tell you all.
I think I saw one in the Museum of American History.
Yes, yes.
Nice.
I still have it. It's a cassette tape with Chuck Colson at Harvard.
Yeah.
I'm tired of making people that I want to give it to don't have cassette tapes.
Cassette tapes, that's
so
right.
how would I access? Do y'all still have a copy of that, or is it a CD now? Or I think it was called "Why Do Good People Do Bad Things" or something.
So that one, okay, yeah, because he spoke at Harvard a couple times and he spoke in other places. We have been, systemically making as much of those resources available while still producing new resources. So for a specific request of a specific talk, just email us through the website and let us find it for you and help you, and we'll figure that out. We don't always have digital copies of some of those originals. I mean, that wasn't digitally recorded. And
No,
so
it was,
if it hasn't been, you see what I mean?
Yes, yes.
So it was recorded on tape.
Right,
so
right.
So there's been a transition process that we've done with a lot of those resources. But a couple things that could be helpful. Number one is YouTube it. It's amazing how many old Chuck Colson speeches are on YouTube.
What's YouTube?
It's ask one of those 11 grandkids and they'll tell you. The other thing, though, is that we systemically play back Chuck Colson classics on the Breakpoint podcast. And so if you subscribe to the podcast, then that's a great way to get it too. But thanks for reminding me of that one, because we keep hearing these speeches. I'm like, oh yeah, that one's a good one. You know, I just spoke up at Acton University up in Grand Rapids, and to prepare for that, I found an old talk that Chuck Colson had given on Abraham Kuyper, and it was from good heavens, you know, and obviously phenomenal. And so there's a lot of those resources that are available. So we're trying to collect and curate. If anybody has any really cool Chuck Colson memorabilia, send it to us, you know, like glasses or, you know, paintings or whatever. Any of his pipes, that would be pretty awesome too, you know, things like that. But anyway, thanks for asking.
I want to make a quick follow-up on his pastor comment, on Pastor Sloop's comment about pastors. We agree that pastors are pivotal to leading the flock, and so we're excited about, we have something called the Virginia Pastors Network. If you're not aware of it and your pastor's not involved in it, that's a great place for us to connect. We view ourselves as a great resource for pastors who are trying to stand strong on Scripture, trying to be a resource and connect with what's current in our culture and in our politics. This particular, coming up in September, we have a big pastor summit, September 11th in Richmond, and it's going to be ministering in an age of gender confusion. We are going to hit the hardest topics that face the church. If you think about, we deal with it in our social circles, pastors are dealing with their families coming forward and saying, look, I've got somebody in my family that's struggling, or we're going to do some equipping. We've got some amazing speakers, Ryan Anderson with Heritage Foundation, if you've seen him, or Rosaria Butterfield, who just has a wonderful story about Christian hospitality and how it relates to this message. So Pastors Network is a great way that we can connect. You can see that through our website, and really just share on his comment about children in public schools. Obviously, very controversial topic. I will never speak against it until all kids financially can be somewhere other than public schools, right? So that for Virginia, we're still not at a place of full school choice. And so many people have their children in public schools whether they want to or not. And so we have to fight for that ground for all children. But I will say this, just today in the Washington Post, article about the family life education stuff. And what do we see? We see the other side saying, the other side says, we view California and Northern Virginia as laboratories for the LGBT. When anybody uses the word laboratory and a child is considered the object of the laboratory, we better be heads up and fighting for that child. John, did you have something? Oh, are we?
Okay, so my question is how I should decide whether or not to approve of laws as an American, but first and foremost as a Christian. Because I've always been taught that America is a place of freedom and that you have the right to do whatever you want as long as that doesn't infringe upon the rights of anyone else. But if that's the rule that we hold to, then things such as assisted suicide should be permissible. And I don't want it to be permissible, so how do I reconcile those two?
Yeah. I think that, gosh, that's such a great question, and this would take a long time to unpack. So let me just try to walk through a handful of things. The first thing is that thing, I've always heard America is a place of freedom where you can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't impact anyone else. That is a slogan that is actually not grounded in reality. That's not the understanding of freedom the founders had. They talked about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When we hear the pursuit of happiness, we kind of think whatever makes me happy. The idea of the pursuit of happiness was framed in their understanding by the good life. The good life is framed with borders, right? Boundaries. So it wasn't the freedom to do whatever you want. It was the freedom to pursue that which is life, that which gives liberty, and that which is the right way to do things, right? So this is one of the things one of the reasons I recommend a book called A Free People's Suicide by Os Guinness. And the reason is because he does an awful lot of work on what freedom is and what freedom isn't, and in our understanding of the founders. One fun exercise on this is to compare how the founders talked about freedom and how the founders or the leaders of the French Revolution talked about freedom. Very different understanding with or without context. I spent actually a little bit of time on that issue today with these high school kids, because that's that's the first thing, okay? Second thing is that how do I balance that as an American and as a Christian? one of the myths, another myth that kind of goes around this question is that, well, you can't legislate morality. The problem with that is that every law legislates morality. We've already decided that you can't discriminate against African Americans based on the color of their skin. We're legislating morality. We did that before the South was ready for it, and that was a good decision because it needed to be done, right? That's legislating morality. Every law. So we've already decided that we should legislate morality. The question is, how far do you go, right? The third one is, you specifically mentioned doctor-assisted suicide, which is a great question. I spent a lot of time on that in 2016. Because the answer is, this doesn't hurt anyone else. The community that represents those with disability flat out disagree with that. Because that's what the line was, is that this won't hurt anybody else. The fact is the right to die very quickly becomes the duty to die. We've seen this across the ocean in Belgium. We've seen it across the ocean in the Netherlands, where initially euthanasia was advanced there on the case of a terminal illness, an illness from which someone would die. That then moved from a terminal illness to an incurable illness. Do you see the difference between those two things? In other words, a hopeless condition, a condition for which someone would not get better. Then that moved, because if there is a physical hopelessness, then there's also a mental hopelessness. And then that moved from the right to die to the duty to die, and the option to die. Then when we should be adding palliative care, we should be adding support. We're not. We're putting people in misery. The other thing, too, is that in Belgium in particular, the community with disability, of those with disability, feel very vulnerable. Because now there's what's called cryptonasia, which is not the patient decides, but the doctor and the caregiver decide. So there have been several cases of euthanasia of children who weren't going to die from their condition, but based on considerations like the inability to communicate, hopeless pain, things like that. We see the same thing in Oregon. In Oregon, that doctor-assisted suicide has been there for 20-ish years. It was argued on the basis, and it always is, it was presented that way in Colorado, of people with unbearable physical suffering. 25 years later, out of Oregon, of all the cases of doctor-assisted suicide, only 20% report the reason they're doing it is because of physical pain. 80% report things like, I don't want to be a burden on somebody else. I don't want to live that way. Do you see what I mean? And this is why, and as we move more and more toward a socialized system of healthcare, then somebody's got to pay the bill. And suddenly, the hopeless condition, it's just like, a kid in a culture where doctor-assisted death is normal, and a parent's wealthy, and a kid is facing a financial crisis, and mom has stage 4 cancer, right? Do you see what I mean? This creates a real crisis for kids. We live in a culture where the family has broken down, right? So you don't have strong family bonds. You then take that choice out of the hands of a son or a daughter and put it in the hands of a government bureaucrat, then there are victims. The biggest lie we're hearing when there's no victims isn't actually about doctor-assisted suicide. It's about the transgender issue. There was a stunning, if you're interested in the transgender issue at all, there was a stunning, and I mean stunning article in, of all places, The Atlantic, right? The Atlantic is a mainstream publication, left-leaning, and last week, and they were hammered. Did you see this?
I think so. I think I know where you're going.
Where is that? Oh, yeah, The Atlantic. They got hammered for it as homophobic, transphobic. This is The Atlantic. Why? Because they suggested that the current ideology about transgenderism has outrun the science. They acknowledged that there's such a thing as detransitioners, people that transition and want to transition back. They acknowledge that healthcare professionals right now, based on ideology, not science, are too quick to put kids on puberty blockers and subject them to things. And we say, we're doing this for the children, we're doing this for the children. The fact of the matter is, we are doing social experimentation on the children. And the thing is even if the children want to go along with it, listen, this is as close as my family, right? And I've lost a family member over this, right? It doesn't just hurt them, it hurts us. It hurts grandma and grandpa, right? So the idea that it's victimless doesn't really play into it as well. Does that kind of give you a framework of
Yes, thank you, that's incredibly helpful.
a number of things? Yeah.
I'm going to add one more thing to this, especially the younger generation, hearing kind of if it doesn't hurt someone else, it must be okay. They're hearing that on marriage. And they're hearing that because the church is not teaching marriage as more than just a union of two people who want to be happy together, right? So until the church starts teaching marriage as God designed it, as a reflection of the bride for the betterment of the community and the family that's going to, and we're going to continue to have kids who don't understand why marriage shouldn't be between anyone who,
Right.
so these kind of things that kind of culture has taught that we aren't correcting have big ramifications on all these issues: transgender, doctor-assisted suicide, marriage, you name it. Why don't we probably need to make this the last question for the night so everybody can. John, go ahead.
Well, thank you. Let's see. I'm glad that you mentioned the Atlantic. This is the same publication that just a few years ago terminated a man because he wrote a private blog about abortion, not in their, and this was his private, message, but he was terminated for that. Now they're catching it because of this other article, and I'm glad that you mentioned Dr. Butterworth, who will be at the pastors' conference in September. Her CD is available from Focus on the Family, and she may be talking about what I'm going to question now. Last week I was at the Restored Hope Network annual conference. This was in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. It was hosted by a large Baptist church. This is a predominantly African American church, 11 to 12,000 members, I understand, and it's a huge building. I'm not at this moment recalling the name of the church, but it was a 3-day event. I went for the last day, and lots of people, and these things have grown and grown. Restored Hope Network, you may wish to look that up, is but one of many ministries that sometimes is referred to as the ex-gay ministry. Now, there's other numbers of others, and maybe that's not the right term historically speaking, because historically speaking, one could say there are no ex-gays. Historically speaking, there are no gays. Actually, there have been people with same-sex desires in the past, some of whom have done quite well, but they weren't gay until the 20th century. These are obviously contemporary terms. But I have been to many events going back to 1995, 96 at Lake Junaluska and elsewhere, where there have been men and women who have testified that after years and decades in same-sex, they are now out of it, because all that I've heard have spoken about the saving power of the gospel of Christ. They don't talk about the so-called reparative therapy. I don't know about that, but they do talk about the saving power. The point being is that we don't hear much of that. I'm not about the so-called ex-gay ministries, if that is the right term, I don't know. But there are numbers of these, and men and women that have so testified at these various events. That's just the one that I went to, and the next one will be in Minnesota, so I won't make that one, and that'll be next year. But you may want to look that up. Restored Hope Network, Transforming Congregations, another. PFOX, Parents and Friends of Ex-Gays and Gays, they have an annual banquet in Northern Virginia, and some others. But let me just put that out there. So maybe somewhere along the line, this will be something that may come to you that you may wish to, emphasize a bit more, because I am pro-choice, meaning We make choices every day. That's why we're here, because we chose to come here.
He raises a great point, and I'll just share, at the Virginia General Assembly, there's probably nothing more threatening. At the Virginia General Assembly, there's probably nothing more threatening to the other side than someone who has made a choice to, at one point, be same-sex attracted and is now either walking in celibacy, or, who has been same-sex attracted and is either choosing celibacy at this point, or something has happened where God has made a radical transformation and they're now heterosexually married. That is, for the left, something that is an anathema. They refuse to acknowledge that this is an existing population. And so we do need to talk about it and bring those stories forward, because we know that God is powerful enough to do anything in anyone's life, whether it's alcoholism, drugs, whether it is somebody who is participating in same-sex relationship, whatever it may be. God can transform those things, and that power of transformation in the public square is extremely powerful. So thanks for bringing that forward.
Last rhetorical question, don't answer. Why are, progressives, why are they pro-choice for abortion, anti-choice when it comes to sex? How can they have it both ways?
Right.
Pro-choice for abortion, no restrictions over here on the abortion, anti-choice when it comes to sex. I think that's okay, I will leave it with that. Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead.
Mr. Stonestreet, can I have your autograph?
Yeah, it'll devalue whatever it is you want me to sign, but thank you. Yeah.
Very good. That's great. All right. Why don't we go ahead and...
Excuse me, I'll make this really brief. We've heard a lot tonight about grassroots activity and how you are suggesting that we comport ourselves in the arena of public opinion. But we've overlooked, I think, the most important thing, and I've only heard it alluded to twice tonight. And that was once you were 25 minutes into your opening remarks, and it was in your third wrap-up point, and it was an anecdotal statement, prayer.
Yep.
Where does prayer fit into
Yep.
this?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because so our closing things, I want to talk about 3 pieces that we want to make sure you're involved with. So as we walk out, John mentioned what's the next thing, right? So we've talked about email alerts. Are you getting informed? Are you on the podcast with the Colson Center? So that's the first piece. Second piece, are you able to get the text message where you can actually link in and watch yourself, right? Because then when you have that conversation with your legislator, you're speaking from an informed, you've actually seen them on a committee engaging the debates. That's critically important. Third thing we haven't talked about is Team Timothy. So that is the Family Foundation's prayer effort. Every week, Tuesday mornings at 10 o'clock, there is a group at our office praying. Sometimes they're at the Capitol, praying over the Capitol, praying for specific legislators. They're praying for a pregnancy resource center every week. They're praying for an abortion center or abortionist every week. They are praying for Israel. They're praying for persecuted Christians. If you want to be a part of that, okay, you're saying, I'm out here in the Valley, I can't go to Richmond. We have a conference line. People are calling in to be a part of that prayer. Okay, you're saying, I work at Tuesday at 10 a.m., I can't be a part of that. Thousands of people are getting an email every week that is a prayer guide for Team Timothy. Pray when God gives you time to pray. When you have that moment with God, it's a guideline. It's probably got, this week 10 senators, and next week it's got, these certain people. God calls us to pray specifically, and we try to help you do that as we engage our culture, right? We pray for the issue of marriage as it comes up in the news. We pray for media. We pray for specific journalists by name each week. If you are not praying in a specific way for our culture, this is a great way to do it. So if you are not signed up for Team Timothy, get signed up. Sean is the guy to see for any of these items. There is one more thing in the back as you walk out. There's a petition. The petition is to get signatures to try to encourage, right? So Virginia is not a state where we sign a bunch of things, hand it to our legislators, and it automatically goes on a ballot, right? That's California. That is not Virginia. But we are a state where every legislator cares about the volume of voters that care about an issue, right? So what we try to do is gather folks that are interested in an issue. This particular petition is to make family life education an opt-in program instead of an opt-out program. This was the original issue that motivated Walt Barbie to create the Family Foundation in 1985. And we are 30 plus years later still fighting it. But there is renewed energy and renewed passion because of things like what's going on in Fairfax, what's going on in Albemarle, which I can't even speak about because there's enough young people in the room, I just can't say it. And so we are taking it back, and we're going to take it to the legislature, and every year until we get it done, we're going to say it is a parent's role to educate their child on matters of the family and sexuality unless they proactively hand that over to the state. And so that is what's in the back as you walk out, and we really encourage you to be a part of that. I'm going to close us out with just one quote and then a prayer. I follow a lot of David Platt's writings in Scripture, and he did a secret church, so a 7-hour dive into Scripture about family and marriage, and started it off because he knew he was going to hit some really controversial things that the church doesn't like to talk about. He started it off with this quote from Martin Luther: "If I profess with the loudest voice and clearest exposition every portion of the truth of God except precisely that point on which the world and the devil are at that moment attacking, I am not confessing Christ. Where the battle rages, there the loyalty of the soldier is proven, and to be steady on all the battlefronts besides is mere flight and disgrace if he flinches at that point." So the hardest stuff we're talking about, lots of society doesn't want to talk about, doesn't want to do anything about. If we flinch at this, are we really contending for the faith as we're called to do in Timothy? Let's go ahead and pray and close this out. Lord God, we are so grateful for this time that you have given to us. We are grateful for the willingness of John to come and join us and share with us. And Lord, draw us into yourself and into engagement in a way that would honor you. Lord, we pray Lord, your protection over the Commonwealth of Virginia and the families herein. Lord, we just pray, God, that you would raise up an army of believers who pray and battle on a spiritual front over the culture, Lord. We pray that you would raise up families that are willing to engage in relationship with their legislators and their board of supervisors, and Lord, people who are willing to stand at the fence and have the conversation with their neighbor and around their dinner tables. God, we ask you to give us the bravery to act according to the convictions that you have given us. Lord, we pray that Scripture would be not in portion and in pieces, but Lord, in a comprehensive way, that we would, Lord, that we would stand on your word in its entirety, and that our pulpits would ring clear and, Lord, with a shepherding heart on these issues towards your people in this Commonwealth. God, we pray that you would grant us safety and a great night of rest as we head out to our homes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.